Parliament member from Iceland, Birgitta Jónsdóttir, is our guest, one of the main leaders, the leader of her party. 90+% voting over the weekend to say no to the private bank heist, the banking tyranny. You have found it, folks, the tip of the spear in the fight against the New World Order. We're here Monday through Friday, 11 a.m. to 3 p.m. Central, the most listened to alternative patriot radio show on AM and FM, global shortwave satellite, and internet. Going back to Birgitta, continuing, recap what the banks did, the fraud, the year of protest, the terrorism act used, the threats by the banks to shut your country down, food shortages, and the people standing strong.
Well, I guess it all began, I'm sure many of your listeners have seen the film about Enron. And Enron was about the same size as the population in Iceland. So when we watched Enron on the national TV in Iceland, very many people felt that we were like the regular staff of Enron, not knowing what the tops were up to. And when everything collapsed in August 2008, most people in Iceland had no idea what was going on. So it came as a complete shock to the nation. So what had happened 5 years prior, the banks were privatized with little help from the Independence Party in Iceland and Progressive Party. They basically donated the banks at really very good prices, wholesale prices to their friends and allies. And because we are, like 80% of our regulations around banks are based on the EU regulations, they managed to start to branch out to other countries. And they were basically, like very many of the bankers, high on world domination, fantasies, and they wanted to take over the bank sector in the UK and in Europe. And I guess they didn't make a lot of friends, and in general, they were quite naive and they had no understanding about how the system worked in general. So it was like school children running amok with a lot of, virtual money, which they sort of sucked out of regular bank or, people that save their money in banks and so forth. And they actually conned people into moving their savings into these unsafe accounts, and it especially targeted the elderly people and immigrants and so forth. But that was during the last year of this insanity. So people in general thought that we were going through this incredible big boom, which I guess was largely just an illusion. So people took loans. They offered 100% loans on mortgages and so forth, and foreign currency loans on cars. And right now, very many people are facing foreclosures. They are facing foreclosures because of if they, went bankrupt on a car loan. Because in Iceland, we don't have that wonderful legislation you have where you can actually return the keys and then, of your house, and then you are sort of free. They will follow you with your debt for the rest of your life, and you will never get rid of it.
And to be clear, the banks have done this in Argentina, in Greece, in Spain, in the U.S. They make this fiat derivatives bubble. It's just made-up crud paper. They certify it as AAA, gold-rated. They sell it to governments. They sell it to citizens. They get all the wealth. And then it came out that Goldman Sachs and others, by design, mainstream news, McClatchy newspapers and others, they then blow it out at the time of their choosing and use the implosion to then come in and buy everything up. And Iceland is the only modern country to be put through this scam to say no. Continue.
Yeah, well, that was a long way to get to that no, I tell you. A lot of fight. But in general, what happened, as I'm sure that most of the listeners to the show understand how the IMF works. So what happened after the terrorist act was placed on Iceland? The UK and the Netherlands government said, with a little help from our Nordic friends, said, okay, if you want to get any loans or the loan lines open, you're going to have to go into an IMF program. And in order for you to go into the IMF program, you're going to have to solve this ISAFE dispute, which is this dispute about the banks that were in the UK and Holland.
And so let me just stop you for a moment. Going back a year ago, The food's not being shipped in. Everything's falling apart. They're saying we've got to sell all the government assets, take citizens' tax money, all for these banks. And the BBC reported Iceland, Britain's unlikely new enemy. This is from a year ago. And it says, until a few days ago, Britain was admired and respected by the average Icelander. But the UK's move to seize the assets of this isolated European state have provoked a backlash of feeling of escalating resentment. They, quote, treated us like terrorists, grabbing the government accounts, grabbing people's bank accounts, saying, we're going to take your money under terror laws and give it to the bankers. Continue.
Well, it was maybe not that extreme. It was they took over an Icelandic bank called the Heritable Bank in London. But what it did, it dried up the credit lines to Iceland and loan lines. So everybody had to fork up cash during a time of complete financial meltdown.
But that's what it said. That in some cases, people couldn't even get their money out for a while, though.
Yeah. Everything was blocked. Students and people from Iceland living abroad could not get money out of their internet banks and so forth, so they had to either starve or rely on friends and family if they had any in the area. But it also created a very difficult paradox, because the Social Democratic Party that is in power now in Iceland have just one dream, and that is to join the European Union. So within all of this turmoil, they decided, let's apply for an application or to join the UA.
Yeah, that's key. Just like Greece 10 years ago, you've got to go into debt and sign the deals with these bankers as part of their rules to get into the EU.
Mm-hmm. Well, also how they basically used it, the UK and the Netherlands governments basically blackmailed us with the EU application as well. They said, we will not support your EU application unless you decide to drop going to court over iSafe, and unless you just choose to, you're going to have to either choose to become isolated, become, North Cuba or Cuba of the North, or do as we tell you. And that is, they went even so far as wanting to make a hell of a lot of money out of us by giving us, forcing us to pay huge interest on this. So, but we managed to stop that. And right now I am in a committee of the leadership working on finding a solution to this. And I find it completely unacceptable that the Icelandic nation will take on any burden from this ordeal.
Birgitta Jónsdóttir, a member of the Icelandic Parliament, continuing. So let's move up to the referendum. What did the referendum state? It passed by over 90%. As you just told us, this is completely freaking the bankers out, because if countries realize this has been done by fraud and that it's a Madoff scheme and that the money's not owed, the next step is talking about prosecuting the bankers that Ron Paul and others are talking about in this country.
Well, the interesting thing and really disturbing thing about the bankers in Iceland, or the Icelandic bankers, is that none of their assets have been frozen. Most of them are living in London, and as many people know, London is ranked among the 5th best tax havens in the world. So they're actually getting back their companies. They're getting back their power and a lot of write-offs, and that is making a lot of people very upset and angry.
Okay, to be clear, flesh that out. The bankers that sold you out in your own country, most of them don't even live in your country, and the banks know that they're their minions, so they're staying in power.
Yeah, I mean, they lost the banks, but they haven't lost their companies. So, I mean, one of the oligarchs, Icelandic oligarchs, he owns the biggest independent media outlet in Iceland. So you can imagine what sort of news you're getting from that outlet.
But the good news is 90+% vote against him. It shows it's not working. But that's what they always have. Brokerage firms. They separately run banks. They get the taxpayers' money. They move the money out into their own accounts. Then they implode it and try to take over the nation. But you've checkmated them.
Well, for now, yes, definitely. And I guess, I don't know, it actually surprised me that the president of Iceland decided to listen to the nation. But there was a huge petition. More than 60,000 Icelanders called on him to allow us to have this national referendum. And it was interesting. There was actually some documents leaked from the U.S. Embassy in Iceland, in Reykjavik, Iceland, and I found it on wikileaks.org. And it was interesting how the British and the U.S. Treasury were very much interested in doing everything in their power to stop the national referendum. And then the same thing applied to, I got some information that, I don't know if you're familiar with the Paris Club, but they were very keen on stopping this national referendum because, especially in Europe, they're very much afraid that, like Greece and Ireland, the people there will demand to have a national referendum about the situation in their countries.
Oh, this is big. This is huge. I mean, the magnitude of this, sending the message that this is fraud, we're not paying it. We're about to go to break, but start telling us about the documents and the Paris Club and how the banks don't like what's happened in Iceland.